I want to do more projects like this in the future because if you think about how people consume journalism and their media, it tends to be us as journalists telling the public something and saying, this is important, we think this is important, here's why, now read that. And we don't often allow readers to then kind of interact with our content. And part of that's just the way content works, right? You go to a website, you read a story, most of the assets you deal with are static, right? Whether they're photos or text, and even videos, which have moving graphics and moving pictures. You can't really interact with it, so to speak. But this project shows the power of using tools like the open web and design and kind of web technology. Because what we were able to do was, I told the story of 3 different cities and how their histories and their racial makeups led to them either being more integrated and more segregated. And then I allowed the reader to say, okay, but you might not care about Chicago, you might not care about DC, maybe you live in Los Angeles, maybe you live in a rural part of North Carolina. And the reader was able to then type where they live and then explore the data for themselves. And so that just adds a level of understanding to a reader that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And then on top of all this, we did it with really great, we worked really hard to get the colors down, the design down, the performance of the web page, to make it perform really well. And so all of these other things allow readers to kind of sit with the project and explore it in a way that, again, had I just told you segregation still exists and left it at that, you might be like, oh, that's really sad or important, but then the reader has nothing else to kind of go forward with that. And I think we're in a really interesting time now because of the technology available to us, journalists can tell stories that scale beyond just what we're even interested in. I told the story because of my experience, growing up in the Bay Area, now living here in DC, and the things I experienced, and that's what drove me to tell that story. But now, once it's published, I think readers are finding narratives that I don't even know about, right? Like one of the really interesting outcomes of this project was people they took where they grew up and then they overlaid how those neighborhoods voted in the 2016 election, and that created a whole new narrative for this project that I had not even thought of. Or rather, I could think of it, but that wasn't the point of my story. My story was to just talk about the history of segregation in America and how we got to where we're at today. And people then took that same data and told different stories with it. And that's something that's really powerful about journalism now, is that we have the means to allow readers to tell their own stories beyond what we initially thought. When I think about, why I became a journalist in the first place, to tell people stories and give people voice, I think there's no better way to do that than letting people just take your journalism and run with it,